initiated by the University of South Carolina School of Medicine in Greenville in August of 2012 to bring local Greenville medical community into closer dialogue with the most influential healthcare and medicine. We welcome all of our healthcare students and practitioners, our local leaders and members of the Greenville community to conversation through with our speakers and welcome him to the podium.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you. Is this thing working? Is it on? I don't think so. Okay. I'm hitting it. Nothing.
A little bit.
Okay. All right, good.
Nice.
Thank you. I do remember, can you all hear me? There's allergies today, I'll tell you. There's a lot in the air today blowing around. Okay, I remember our luncheon distinctly. We sat at the Tabard Inn in Washington. If you haven't been there on N Street, I recommend it. It's been around a couple of 100 years or so, a very distinguished place. The onion soup was outstanding, as I recall. I haven't been there much since then, but it was a great lunch. But it strikes me how satisfying it is to see something actually happen from a lunch, or hear ideas that people have and a vision that they have, and then watch that vision being executed. That's a very unusual progression. A lot of people have a lot of good ideas, but executing those ideas is really tough. And I'm aware of about 1% of the politics that was involved in putting this together. And that 1% is daunting enough. I don't know about the other 99%. Maybe I don't want to know about the other 99%. But may I extend my congratulations to Jerry, to Spence, and all of you for staying the course and developing what I think is a new model for health science centers for the 21st century on many, many, many levels. So congratulations. I want to talk today about where I see the physician winding up or going in the 21st century. I think it's pretty safe to say that the models that have been used traditionally in physician education have been pretty standard for quite a bit of time since Flexner's 1910 report. And despite probably 50 to 100 calls for radical reinvention of medical education, not all that much has happened in general. But I would contend that the forces that are coming down in 21st century medicine are unlike anything since before Hippocrates. Speaking of whom, there he is. Anybody here had a chance to work with him? I mean, and of course, this, being from Hopkins, you've got to mention Osler, right? I mean, and for thousands of years, I think it's pretty safe to say that the practice of medicine has been what I would call a traditional profession, that a physician possessed a unique body of knowledge and skills and put them to use in the care of patients. That's the definition of a profession of any kind. In this relationship, the doctor-patient relationship was the paramount feature. And the foundational idea of this personal, caring relationship has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Until now. So I think fundamental change is on the way. 21st century trends are transforming some of the most basic and timeless qualities of medicine. Qualities of medicine that have been around for thousands of years. The nature of the guild, we're a guild, our profession, and where the locus of knowledge is, no longer inside the guild, but rapidly spreading outside the guild. The sacrosanct doctor-patient relationship, I think, is being replaced with something different, slowly but surely. Certainly, we're losing the ability often to solve patient problems single-handedly in this complexly designed 21st century environment. And we have a medical marketplace driven by technology, artificial intelligence, and massive consumer empowerment. Patients are becoming very empowered. And we're now going into the era of precision medicine, which again is a game changer for things that we do every day. If you look at some of the drivers, you have these, which have always been around. This is not new. We've always faced issues of changing disease patterns, whether it's Ebola or AIDS or new forms of cancer. The phenomenon of globalization is accelerating. The pace of change is accelerating. Politics and policies, what can I say? Don't need to say much. Population demographics are evolving. Societal needs and values. I mean, all these things are tough enough to think about. But let's look more specifically at some of these. So I want to consider with you briefly changing market forces, consumer empowerment, which I mentioned earlier, science, and technology. Just considering these four things amongst all these other ones for our discussion. So we have a $1 trillion plus spend in the U.S. on healthcare, about $3.2 trillion, 18 to 19% of our gross domestic product. $1 trillion is a lot of money. If I had $1 trillion in the bank and I happened to like Spence, I said, Spence, you're such a nice person. I'm going to give you $10 million a day until the $1 trillion runs out. Do you think Spence would be able to spend that in his lifetime? Or his children's lifetime? Oh, I haven't met his wife. Okay. Case in point. Thank you, Spence. I'll remember that example. But, you know, that's an awful big attraction for our healthcare entrepreneurs in the tech sector and other areas. Tremendous opportunity. You're all aware of this wave of consolidation in healthcare. That's, again, an economically driven phenomenon, mostly to gain what I would call provider power in the market, right? Provider power. And then the restraints on practices are weakening. Information and services delivered directly to patients, bypassing the profession. Look, when I was in medical school, which was a couple thousand years ago, if you said to me, I'm going to be watching the nightly news and there's going to be a commercial for a drug that's only available by a prescription by a physician, I would say you're out of your friggin' mind. It's not possible. Can't be done. Unheard of. If you said it would be for Viagra, or a Viagra-like drug, I would have said, let's pink slip this person very, very quickly. And now, when I watch the nightly news, which my wife insists that we do, and I, being in Washington, I got to watch all the news, the number of commercials during that half-hour period, at least on NBC, which is the last one I watched, there's at least 4 or 5 of them. Humira. I mean, names I can't even, I don't even know what they are, but, you need a biologic, do you need this, do you need that, directly to patients, bypassing us, bypassing the profession. That is profound. Let's look at some obvious examples beside that. Look at the ambulatory care phenomenon and the retail clinics that are growing up all over the country. This slide is a little bit dated, so the numbers are probably larger, but, at the time of this article in 2015, there were over 1,900 and growing in CVS, Walgreens, Kroger, Target, and they only have clinics in 8% of their stores at the time of this article. So there's a lot more room for growth. There are urgent care centers all over the place, about 6,400 with an annual growth rate of 300 to 600 per year. I already mentioned direct-to-consumer marketing and advertising, and it's not just drugs. It's wearables, it's diagnostics. Have you seen the 23andMe advertisements for genetic testing? There are many, many examples of this. So as a result, our consumers are getting an awful lot of information that we don't give them. That control that we had over maybe control isn't the right word, that fountain of knowledge that we held so dear, that we struggled to learn and master, and the skills that we developed. are now going, a lot of that is going from somebody else directly to our patients. Whether it's knowledge, technology, social media, or just the loosening of restrictions about advertising what you can sell to consumers. That's a real game changer. So where does this leave us, just this phenomenon alone? Well, here's a quote from an article in JAMA in 2016. Self-testing and self-interpretation could cause even more problems than they aim to solve. It is not clear that healthy people or patients can be trained to use diagnostics more wisely. This complicates our life. It complicates our business. It complicates everything tremendously. Now, what about science? I could spend the whole day just talking about science. But as I mentioned earlier, we're entering this new era of medical discovery that's supposedly focusing on precision medicine. So, you know, there are many definitions of precision medicine. I like this one: medical care designed to optimize efficiency or therapeutic benefit for particular groups of patients, especially by using genetic or molecular profiling. This is a big area that's coming in very, very fast and changes the paradigm, in my opinion, for healthcare delivery, drug discovery, and really virtually everything else. All our models are going to be changed because of this. I mean, if you're a drug company and you know your very basis for financial security was having a blockbuster drug that everybody had to take that only benefited a few people, which has been the model, right? I mean, how many people take antihypertensives who actually benefit from them? We don't really know, but it's not 100%. It's far less. But there are many other examples. That model is going to be disappearing. But here, I think, is the biggest threat, the biggest issue for the profession and for the physician in the 21st century: technology. Here's where thousands and thousands of years of tradition are turned on its head. And you gotta be thinking about this every day. We are moving from a print-based industrial society. I guess Gutenberg started that at some point in time. And in the industrial revolutions in the 1800s, the steam engine, the steam power, right? And then electricity and all that stuff. We're moving to a technology-based internet society. What a profound change. And we are in the midst of what has been called by the tech gurus a technologic convergence. If you haven't heard talk of convergence before, start listening for it now. What is this convergence? It's all these things and more starting to work together, coming together, somewhere in these dense dynamic data clouds, as they're described. But this convergence is creating a huge uptick in possibilities when all these different technologies and all these different concepts start working together. You know, it's change that's very, very fast. It's not linear. You know, our minds work linearly, right? Point A, point B, point C, point D. But this is exponential change. And we're told to be at the knee of that curve. If the curve goes like this, we're right at that knee of that curve because of this technologic convergence. This is so powerful. And it's calling into question so many fundamental assumptions about what it means to be human, not alone what it means to practice medicine. You know, what is the meaning of an algorithm in medical practice? What is the meaning of data analysis in medical practice and patient decision making? This is the big deal. And, you know, I could put up much longer lists, but there's so much stuff going on now in the tech world. You probably know a lot about this. We're moving from portable diagnostics to what's called insidables, things you have inside you that regulate and monitor things. Artificial intelligence is a huge deal. The end of human experiments. Who needs clinical trials anymore? You can enroll maybe 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 people in a clinical trial at huge expense, try to control the variables, or you can just go out into a connected cloud where you have 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 million people and figure things out. It's a different way of envisioning how we do science. Augmented reality, you know about all that. One of the things that I didn't put up here that's kind of interesting is something called affective computing. Affective computing. Training artificially intelligent machines to recognize human emotion. Have you heard of this? I saw a demonstration of it at a conference I held in January in Florida. We brought in some people from Singularity University. And they gave us an app that is a voice analyzer. You could speak into it and it would tell you whether you're telling the truth or not, something about your mood, your personality. And we tested it on a few people, and I'll tell you, it was awfully close. The other thing is that recognizing facial expressions. Have you seen the movie Ex Machina with Alicia Vikander and all those folks, where she plays the computer and she says, "You're lying, you're lying, you're lying." You know, the human eye can only recognize so many facial expressions. The computer recognizes all of them. And what this is a form, affective computing is a form of pattern recognition, recognizing patterns. And these machines are far more capable than human beings of recognizing patterns. Whether it's looking at an X-ray or a CT scan or somebody's face. Yikes. Human professionals will have to come to terms with the need to defer to the superior capabilities of machines. I didn't say that. The quote is there for you to think about. And I love this one. You'll be paid in the future based on how well you work with robots. Again, not my quote. And I think these views present a compelling platform for the transformation of medical practice. And of course, we need to consider these things as well. They didn't go away. I just chose not to highlight them in favor of the other four things that I discussed. But that's what's changing, the fundamental nature of medical practice. So let's look at four key trends that we have to consider. First trend I would call care anywhere. You know, you've built some great buildings. And they're certainly necessary, but they're expensive. The overhead, the staffing, the headaches, everything, right? Yet we're moving toward an era where technology is moving with and inside the patient's body, wherever the patient may be. People talk about the at-home hospital, for example, in this context. So large fixed infrastructure are necessary, but may be configured completely differently, will have to be configured differently. And consumers, what do they want? They want it right now, all at once, wherever they are. And ultimately, that's what we're going to be giving them. Second, so that was care anywhere. This is care in teams. I believe today the one-to-one doctor-patient relationship is being augmented by relationships with multiple health professionals. You're doing that now. You've got great teams. People are doing all that. But these teams are going to be enhanced and enlarged with professionals who don't even exist today. You're going to discover. And figuring out how to gain the most value from team care will be your key. Doesn't mean the doctor's the captain of the ship, by the way. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. Reimbursement has to be supportive of this somehow or some way. And the scope of practice, what people actually do in all levels of the healthcare provider system, needs careful redesign in this new world. So that was care by teams. Now we come to care by large data sets. I went up to McGill about 15, 20 years ago, I can't remember, to meet with cognitive psychologists about the development of clinical expertise, how people learn to be good clinicians, and I learned it was pattern recognition, not understanding of pathophysiology and textbook medicine. The most skilled clinicians had the best pattern recognition. And what do computers do better than us? Pattern recognition. They also told me that the most expert clinician could juggle 8 to 12 facts about a patient in his or her head at any given moment. How many facts are we going to, how many data points are we going to have for patients in the future? 50? 100? 1,000, 10,000, 100,000? Nobody really knows. But collection of these huge metadata sets are becoming standard for patients, eventually becoming continuous. And a new interpretive and functional infrastructure will be required to manage this data. Watson did not appear out of whole cloth. IBM thought this through and tried to figure out somebody's got to manage this because humans can't do it. And the locus of decision making, therefore, is shifting somewhere out there in the cloud where this big data set will be analyzed. And finally, the most interesting and threatening one, again, coming back to the technology, is care by machines. Now, we know that machines can outperform humans in many tasks. Some types of surgery, I happened to sit in on I saw a prostatectomy with the Da Vinci, the latest Da Vinci. It was a Da Vinci 6 or 7 or something. Wow, I mean, that's the start of something that's important. They certainly can do data storage and recall. Machines don't get tired. Their abilities don't climb with age. They can be updated, and you don't need a big HR department to manage them. Here's a break for everybody, right? And they don't have to be perfect, by the way. It's like self-driving cars. They don't have to be perfect. They just need to make less mistakes than humans. Care by machines. So there are lots of robots trending already. I mean, we talked about Watson briefly, and there are many, many things being developed beside Watson that are out there. Most of us have robotic pharmacies. I don't know if you have one. GA, do you have one yet? With the dispensing of medications.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure you do. Pap smear pretty much is all robotics now. I saw an interesting video from Japan where they have robots living in with elderly companions. The humans can develop an emotional attachment with these machines. Did you ever see the film I, Robot with Will Smith? Remember his mom had a robot and they were making pie together or something? I mean, I have no doubt that we can develop emotional attachments to machines. I don't know that they can return that, but maybe they can be programmed to do that. And we talked about surgical robots. So the question for us as a profession in regards to the care by machines is, how are the machines to be managed? Now, I'm not talking about a Terminator movie-like scenario here, although if it's out there, if you listen to it, and you want to get into a discussion with me about what some of the frightening implications of the singularity and the other things that people mention in this, it's not science fiction anymore. But how are the machines to be managed? And by the way, what in your medical school curriculum helps the students do this? So some things for us to be concerned about. I'm going to try to blow through these so we can have a little bit of discussion. I'm trying to set this up so we can get the engines flowing a little bit. I hope I'm succeeding. I can't tell. Am I making any progress here, folks? I want to have a discussion with you. So physicians need to be worried about how they acquire knowledge and how knowledge is being acquired outside of them. Big deal, big problem. What new kinds of expertise will physicians need to have that they don't have today in this brave new world? And I think there are plenty of areas we're going to talk about. Becoming effective as part of a team, technology management I talked about, and I didn't mention this at all, but I think it's another big deal, which is the globalization of the health economy and medical services. I mean, you all know about medical tourism and research relationships around the world and stuff like that. That's going to become more intense, more of a much bigger deal. We're going to see much more globalization of our field. So I think to practice effectively in the 21st century, physicians need to become expert at these 5 additional skills. And as I go through these one by one, think about the great curriculum you've developed here, which is outstanding. I met some of your students today. They passed the test, Jerry. We had a tough question for them. What do you think? About what would happen to the protein and glucose in the spinal fluid if you had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. I know you all know that. So the first skill that I think physicians need, if they're going to be effective and used effectively in 21st century medicine, are mathematical skills. Math, mostly statistical skills, mainly statistical skills. and the communication skills necessary to understand and communicate the meaning of probabilities to patients, because we're going to be using big data and predictive analytics. So I went up to see Watson a couple times. They're now located in something called Silicon Alley in Lower Manhattan. What does Watson do? And you know, whatever it is, produces lists of probabilities. You know, getting all the patient data, all the world literature, everything else. So a patient has an 89% chance of this, or this test would be useful in 62% of the time, whatever. You get a list of probabilities. If you've read any books or studied the work of Tversky and Kahneman in the framing effect, they got the Nobel Prize for that, you know how important understanding probability and presenting that to patients in a frame that works for them is, how important and essential that is. How well are our students and residents being trained in math? How well do they understand probabilities and Bayesian theory and things of that sort? And how good are they at communicating probabilities, considering the framing and other effects in the face of unique human complexities? I don't know any place that's doing that. I see that as a crucial part of the future. Do the math. The new tools for tailoring treatment will demand a greater tolerance of uncertainty and greater facility for calculating and interpreting probabilities than we have been used to as physicians and patients. Assessing and acting on these probabilities will require approaches to data presentation, risk quantification, and communication of uncertainty for which we are largely ill-equipped and that we already struggle with. 2016 New England Journal of Medicine. So I'm not the only one thinking along these lines. If you've seen, if you read Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies, I know you all have read that. You also read his book, The Gene, which followed that. Plus you saw his 3-part series on PBS. The greatest clinicians have a sixth sense for biases. The discipline of medicine concerns the manipulation of knowledge under uncertainty. This is a very strong case for this issue. 2, alluded to this earlier, knowing how to work with the machines. How's that going to be? How are we going to do that? Machines and systems will work alongside tomorrow's professionals as partners. The challenge here is to allocate tasks as between human beings and machines according to their relative strengths. How's that going to happen? Who's going to be in charge? Where are you going to learn the skill set necessary to do that? Is it going to be the equivalent of the medical therapeutic device representative coming into your office and saying, I've got a great new appliance for you to use? No, that days are long gone. It's going to be much more complicated, and we need to know how to work with these machines. The profession of medicine has a tremendous opportunity and an obligation to oversee the application of this technology to patient care. JAMA 2016. Where have we as a profession stepped up to the plate on this issue? I haven't seen it anywhere. Nowhere. 3, 4, and 5. Management and oversight of delegated responsibilities within multi-professional healthcare teams. Already discussed that. I hope you got it. 4, adapting clinical practice to performance measurement and value-based payment. I think you have a leg up on this one, from what I can understand. And 5 as well, proactively promoting population health in addition to treating individual patients. No small challenges, but 4 and 5, you're looking pretty good, I think. But wait, there's more, and this is not a late-night infomercial for Ginzu knives or whatever we can get for you. But wait, there's more. So Joseph Weizenbaum wrote in 1976, and he was a guy who developed a program in the 70s called ELIZA, which was the very first sort of psychological diagnostic program for machines. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I never knew about it until I read his book. But he wrote in that book, Computer Power and Human Reason, there are some things people come to know only as a consequence of having been treated as human beings by other human beings. As human beings, we're inclined to believe that, aren't we? That there's something uniquely special about that. And Mark Polacco said, healing, whether physical or emotional, is an experience of life, one that technology can never replace. So you can see where I'm heading with this part of the talk. So I think physicians need to become even better at two traditional skills. Respecting the right of patients to make choices according to their values and understanding how these values impact care decisions, and having real and tested abilities to provide the uniquely human services that patients and communities need, including empathy and compassion. How well are these being taught today in medical schools and residency programs? And why isn't that the entire curriculum, virtually? Some views of these traditional skills. Joseph Campbell, if you read his book, The Power of Myth, anybody familiar with his work? Tremendous mythologist, an unbelievable, brilliant scholar, wrote that his definition of compassion in medicine is suffering with the patient. Very good definition, the best I've seen. Paul Kalanithi's book, When Breath Become Air, you know his story, a neurosurgeon at Stanford resident who died of lung cancer. This was a really big bestseller. I think he died in his 30s, and is worth a read if you haven't had a chance to do so. It's a tremendous book. The physician's duty is not to stave off death or return patients to their old lives, but to take into our arms a patient and family whose lives have disintegrated and work until they can stand back up and face and make sense of their own existence. And then Anatole Boyer, one of my favorite writers, wrote in Intoxicated by My Illness, not every patient can be saved, but illness may be eased by the way doctors respond. These are some views of these traditional skills that I've been talking about. But the profession must overcome a classic problem that's facing all professions, not just medicine, but all professions. All professions seem to share the bias of finding difficulty in imagining any thoroughgoing re-engineering of their own discipline. This is that phenomenon of resistance, to cultural change and behavioral change, whatever. I like to put it this way when I'm dealing in a tough situation on a visit, and the dean or the VP or the university president says to me, not everybody on my team wants to go in this direction. And I said, can you point those people out? Oh yeah, after 20 minutes of a meeting with them around the table with their colleagues, I can say A, B, D, E, F, and G are not following us along. I say to them, well, what can I do about it? Well, here's what I would suggest. Bring them into your office one-on-one and say, Joan or Joyce or Tim or Bob, based on this last meeting we've been having or our interactions, it seems to me that you are seeking to preserve the problem to which you should be the solution. And then you get one of two reactions. Unfortunately, the majority is, you're out of your mind. I've been at this university for 15 years. I've got a great track record. I know what I'm doing. I don't know what you're talking about. That's a person who can't be on your leadership team anymore. Goodbye. If you're lucky and the person's got something, you'll get the reaction, could you repeat that? Well, what I said, Bob, or Joan, or whatever, or Jerry, was, I think you are seeking to preserve the problem to which you should be the solution. And the person says, I never thought about it this way. Let me think about it and get back to you. There's a retention for you. You got hope. But you cannot truly affect the kinds of changes that are going to come down the pike without having people around you who have this problem. You're re-engineering things here big time, and you need everybody to be on board. You're probably luckier than most places that have been entrenched for 50 or 100 years, and they have real big issues with this. So, in conclusion, this is my first slide. So from thousands of years, we had Hippocrates, we had Osler. Hippocrates is reportedly to have said, I don't know if it's true or not, it is more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. Did he really say that? I don't have it on tape. Wikipedia or somewhere found it. I don't know what that means, but I like it. And then, this is more legitimate. William Osler said, medicine is a science of uncertainty and an art of probability. So for thousands of years, it has never been more important, in my opinion, for physicians to return to these roots. Compassion, respect, communication, all the things that are coming to the fore in 21st century medicine if we are to retain our value and our identity as a profession. But it requires rethinking so many different things, but reestablishing what has stood for thousands of years. So with that, let's stop and let's have a little, do we have time for a few minutes of discussion, Jerry? And so you don't have to agree with me or anything. I'd love to hear comments and thoughts and so forth. So I threw a lot at you. I don't know, you've been thinking about this night and day, but do we need a mic for folks? Yeah. Are these working or? Okay. Okay.
So my question.
If you even know the answer.
Right.
You know, that's a very perceptive question, because to take the larger view, knowledge is becoming externalized. So instead of being in our students' and physicians' heads, where it was exclusively for so many thousands of years, it's becoming externalized, out of their heads, somewhere else. And teaching students and physicians to incorporate that external knowledge into a diagnostic and treatment plan requires some of the skills that I mentioned. I think students being much more digitally native than the faculty are naturally able to acquire information, but they are not naturally able to do the right thing with that information, and that's where we need to come in. You know, as I mentioned earlier, your point is so perceptive because things are going direct to patients now, bypassing us, direct, in all ways, shapes, and form. How do you sort that all out? Where do you begin? And I think you begin by having the skills necessary to interpret that information, the mathematical skills, and the communication skills. You know, and to understand that in the face of the uniquely human complexity that that patient presents. Because everybody is different, right? And we know from genomics and metabolomics and all this other stuff that there are differences that everybody has. And we need to understand those and be able to interpret them and communicate them to patients. That is a real challenge. To what extent will the medical marketplace shift outside of the realm of physicians and certified caregivers in this free-for-all, this technologic free-for-all? I don't know. You know, we think as a profession we have control. Well, we control licensing, we control practice, we control accreditation. You know, that can change in a heartbeat. And just look at the force of the market in healthcare in the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and that's just accelerating. It's a natural evolution of market-based healthcare. And I went to a conference on the West Coast at Singularity University. It was me and 800 tech entrepreneurs. You should all try it sometime, and see the energy, the vitality, the entrepreneurship, the idea formation, the awarding of prizes for people who come up with the best ideas. Like, remember there was a prize for a car that could go the farthest without going solar power, or a plane that could do that. They're doing the same thing now in medicine. Can you develop a blood test for cancer? Simple, routine blood test as a cancer screening tool that could be available to any age. Things of that sort. They're moving very, very rapidly. And my feeling is that our institutions, our academic health centers, need to respond to this by, in a sense, becoming more like tech companies and taking advantage of the one thing they can do that no other company can do, no other organization can do, which is to capture the synergy that can exist between education, research, and patient care optimally aligned with each other to produce a learning health system. I think that's our sweet spot. And if we can work in that, we can develop our system to do that, I think we'll be fine no matter what comes down the pike, because we have a unique contribution to make. But in so doing, we can't be ignoring these trends, and we have to not feel in competition with them, but to embrace them. We need to make our universities and our health systems more experimental in scope, more data-driven, and embrace tech companies in the way that we need to, and not be afraid to make some mistakes. Vince. Well, your comments are very good. I mean, very on mark. When I talk to leaders around the country, and I say, you don't have the problem to this extent at all, they say, and we go over the threats, that I listed, right? And the list is long. Their general conclusion is that it's more, the internal problem is greater than the external problems. Despite all these external things coming down the pike, these are bright, capable, smart people, hardworking, who can come up with ideas and solutions. But getting their faculty and staff to change their behaviors is the rate-limiting step for many of them. That's the advantage of a new school. Spence and Jerry would not hire someone who didn't feel that they're ready for something new and different and bold and exciting. So you're creating culture, not changing it. But for these other institutions, and maybe University of South Carolina, I don't know. I mean, been around a long time, may have this problem. And other institutions may have it as well. How do you change faculty behavior? That is a fundamental job of leadership. How does a leader figure out and marshal the resources to change behaviors toward a different goal? And I've seen some people do it, and I've seen most people not been able to do it. Now, if you look at the accreditation regulation system, well-meaning system, based on the assumption that only the profession can judge the profession. The 19th century made perfect sense. Post-Flexner, probably an excellent idea. But does that make sense in the 21st century, given all the things I've talked about and some things I haven't talked about? That only the profession can judge the profession. And let's remember that these accrediting regulatory agencies are businesses. These are not-for-profit by and large, except for the state-run entities like the medical boards and whatever, licensing. These are not-for-profit business enterprises that must have a business model to survive. These are not just purely altruistic organizations that are saving the public. And to a certain extent they are doing great by protecting the public, but they're also businesses. And businesses need to have a bottom line and need to be able to pay their executives and their staff and cling to the power that put them in that position and not give up that power. Why is the regulatory burden increasing? Because power is increased. And, changing that model may be necessary in the 21st century, Spence. But it's going to take, to change the model is going to require a real, almost kind of revolution in how we judge and accredit ourselves. And I think the leadership of medicine has to ask itself, if it can, is this model going to continue with regulation, accreditation along the lines that it's been? All good people, by the way, working really hard, but they're trying to solve problems that are largely 20th century problems. And do we need something new? A new form of protection of the public that goes beyond what these organizations do? And I would argue maybe we do, because so much of this now is externalized to our profession. We don't control everything anymore. So maybe there's got to be some other vision of how all the stuff that's out there that's going to be taken into the equation and will help us judge what it is that we do and get us away from this bureaucratic, well-meaning, expensive enterprise that we're in terms of every so many years getting another accreditation visit. Someone sent me a letter when I first started a job in Washington, a very brilliant leader of one of the places you know. And he just said, Steve, we're over-accredited, and here are the costs of accreditation for this institution for the last year. Now, it had multiple health schools, it had all kinds of stuff. And it was in the millions and millions of dollars, both in terms of actual costs and time. We need to rethink that in terms of where we're going forward, but it's going to take real leadership to change the model. I wish I could give you more than that, Spence. Yes? Well, well, right away, you're not below. Stop thinking of yourself as below. They're below you. They are serving you, not the other way around. Because if you have the below mentality, you're not going to get anywhere. You got to think differently. You got to think, you know, I'm here and they're here. They work for me, and we're going to deal with that. We're paying their salaries, in effect, right? Isn't that what we're doing? So you got to have a different mentality, and people have to start talking about it openly, and meeting colleagues at other institutions and thinking about new ideas and new strategies, and maybe a new organization will spring up, or a new something will happen, and people will migrate to that first slowly, and then a lot of will. You know, it's sort of that kind of change has to happen. But thinking of yourself as a peon below these great, big, august, bureaucratic organizations is exactly the wrong thing to be thinking. They work for you. You're paying their salaries one way or the other. Well, first of all, I would say that, you know, what is the yardstick of success? If your yardstick of success is where you are on the U.S. News and World Report ranking list, then it's preordained what you're going to be doing as an organization, right? That's a beauty contest, basically, right? If your success is going to be judged by where you go year to year on the NIH rank list of funding, then it's preordained where you're going to spend your money, who you're going to recruit, what's going to happen. If, on the other hand, your yardstick is different, which is, hey, we're going to measure the health and well-being of the community that we serve in a meaningful way and try various things to improve the health and well-being of the community and be judged in our performance by that statistic, change the game. But you got to be very brave to do that. It means, you know, changing the level of importance that you ascribe to various things. You know, if the most important thing is that U.S. News and World Report or the NIH ranking, you're going to behave a certain way as an institution. And if that's the way the institution wants to go, then everything will fall in line that way. If you decide that's not for us, or we have bigger ideas or better ideas, then that requires a lot of institutional change in terms of your fundamental assumptions and how you're going to achieve them, and the willingness to experiment to get there. And to be a continuous improvement kind of system. Some things work, some things don't work. Yes? I like that. It's a very nice articulation. I know that Jerry and Spence want people coming to them not with problems, but with solutions, right? I mean, you could spend your whole day listening to problems. When I was dean, I said, listen, just come with me with a solution or don't come. I mean, there's almost so much you can do in the course of a day. I think that's a good point. But, when you think about health and well-being of communities, and we begin to take on this population health thing, the whole thing that's missing from that formulation is the responsibility of patients. Right? It's almost as if we take onto ourselves everything that we do, and we're responsible 100%. And that's not the case. There's got to be a partnership with the community in what we do, a meaningful partnership. And I believe that technology, in the form of insidables and wearables and through the phones or whatever, is the way that partnership can be really, really enhanced in a big way. That makes the problem and solution one. Yes? And should probably be a big part of the curriculum every year, and in residency too. You. Yes. Right. They can afford it. I think that's a great question. I think you're going to see all kinds of third-party solutions to this problem. Working without EPIC or without EPIC, you're going to see all kinds of third-party solutions. I saw some prototypes in San Diego. They're far from coming to terms with it, but they're a major step up in computing technology and all kinds of stuff that will take into consideration so many more variables, analyze them with smart, artificially intelligent algorithms and pattern recognition, that you'll be able to get that information in a much more distilled form. Now, how those systems will integrate or bypass your EPICs and other proprietary systems, I don't really know. I mean, somebody ought to write a book about the rise of Cerner and EPIC in the United States, and how that worked and what's happened to it. And why we let that happen. Why would we let happen systems that can't talk to each other, that only covered certain things, that were billing intensive, did not collect clinical data so that we use it for real-time research and things of this sort? Why do we let that happen? We can answer that question, of course, but we did let that happen. And now we've paid the price for that, and we're going to be paying the price for that for a long time. But I think you will see third-party solutions coming down the pike. And they will be a lot cheaper than what you have today. A lot cheaper than what you have today. Well, I think you will see some of these third-party solutions, but let's not forget, what is the platform we are all standing on? The platform we're all standing on is the U.S. healthcare system. And that is the platform that has generated everything that's happened in healthcare. I'm going to leave it at that. Well, should I do it, Bob? Is it fair? Okay. So one of the questions I ask students when I go on these visits, and it started with a lecture I gave at a university medical school. Oh, I don't remember. So the faculty were seated on one side of the auditorium, and all the students were seated on the other side of the auditorium. Why? I mean, but that was the fact. So I'm giving this talk about, it was called Medical Education Needs a Reboot, an actual reboot. And at one point in the talk, I turned to the student section and I said, how many of you feel that you are being taught in the way in which you want to learn? Not a single hand went up. So I decided that's a question I'm going to ask on all my visits. So I asked it today. You passed. No student said, no student's hand went down. They all went up, basically, when I asked that question. They all feel they were being taught in a manner in which they wanted to learn. That is a real plus. I don't get that yes very often. Now, it wasn't representative. These are just a very small group of students that were busy studying and maybe whatever. And we had, did I ask you to leave the room, Bob? I can't remember. Okay. I did ask him to leave. But, you know, that was a real positive, Jerry. You know, it was nice to see that feedback. Because in general, that's not the case. That students are being taught not in the way they wish to learn. Well, you know, we have a global branch, and I've spent a lot of time in countries with different health systems. We'll tell you there's no perfect health system. I couldn't send you to any country to say that's the system that you want. But what I have observed is a sense of security that I think makes people less stressed in their lives and happier, or whatever you want to call it, or just maybe less stressed is a better term, Jerry, because they have that safety net that they know will not bankrupt them. I mean, I'm told that the leading cause of bankruptcy in the U.S. is medical. Is that correct? I'm told that. I haven't read it recently, but you know, so the countries that seem to have a safety net, that you know you're not going to be bankrupt, that you will be taken care of, you might have to wait, you know, a long time. I'll tell you the story. A friend of mine who's a dean of a medical school, I'm not going to mention where, but not in the U.S., he or she had a bunion on his or her foot. Actually, modern terminology is to use the term they as a singular. Did you know that? Okay, so they had a bunion on their foot. One person. And they went to their primary care doctor, who said, oh my God, you have a painful bunion on your foot. And they said, what do I need to do? And the doctor said, you need to see the orthopedist who specializes in this. You might need surgery for this very painful condition. It took about 6 months to get in to see the orthopedist, because this bunion on the foot is not, you know, a life-threatening illness or whatever. So they went to the bunion specialist, who looked at it and said, yep, we got to do surgery. We have to schedule you. We can do you in about 6 months. Now, the thing is getting worse, you know, day by day. It's not getting any better. It's getting more and more painful. Finally, the day came. They had the surgery and had a good outcome. So I asked them, it's awkward, isn't it? I asked them, well, how did you feel about this? You know, you were suffering for a year before you got this thing done. And they said, it's my duty as a citizen that I know that other people are sicker than me, and in the sense of social solidarity in this country, I'm willing to wait in moderate pain while everybody else gets taken care of. And I was trying to imagine that conversation taking place in the United States. But it's, I'm not saying we need to go to a system like that. I'm just saying it strikes me as a difference in how the system operates and the impact it has on people. We have a very complicated system to navigate. When my mother needed, did she want to do Part D or not? Do you know how hard that was to figure out? The donut hole and all this other stuff, and Medicare Advantage, and I mean, it just, you need a specialist just to take you through the options, even though you're in the profession, and that does create stress, doesn't it? And uncertainty, and what is covered and what is not covered, and what are the loopholes, and what are all the things that are going on. Ultimately, I don't think that is 100% supportive of health and well-being. But we have a 250-year tradition of this. It's not something that we're going to change in the near term, and we need to do the best we can as health providers to go around it. Absolutely.
Any comment?
I think we have to partner with tech companies and be smart about how we marshal our resources in working with them. I would not like to see us get bypassed, on our platforms. I mean, suppose a company comes up with a fantastic education platform, so that every student in your institution will get a state-of-the-art information in the latest technological way delivered to them in a curriculum of medicine. And let's say it's going international or whatever. What does that mean for your FTE component in education? I was telling folks earlier about students complained to one of my trips a number of years ago that they had a lecture from a basic science professor using a carousel projector. And I said to them, kept a straight face, and I said, so why is that a problem? He said, well, we're paying, huge amounts of money every year to get something that's 20 or 30 years old, and we can get it other sources, serve. So there's tremendous opportunity there that we have to be very cognizant of. Research is already morphing, Jerry, into this sphere. Researchers have already figured this out, and they're working in all kinds of collaborative ways. For researchers, I'm told that the excitement is at the interstices of disciplines right now. They're doing a very good job of doing that, connecting all over the world. Tying that research to clinical care is the challenge that we face. And that is something we see. In clinical care, it's going to happen right and left unless we're part of that solution. And that requires getting out of our comfort zone and listening and thinking more deeply about stuff and finding partners that we can work with that we might not have worked with before. I've written about partnerships in healthcare. I think we need to partner with the private, the public, the whatever sectors in meaningful ways, but we make the same 8 mistakes every time we try to do a healthcare partnership. I won't go into them. I have a monograph on that if you'd like to see it, but we tend to make the same 8 mistakes when we enter into a partnership, none of which have been made here, by the way. Anybody want to get the last word in? Have I tired you all out? Was it worth your time? Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
So we are out of time. So if you want to shake hands with Dr. Wartman, whatever you'd like to do. Good.